I'm with Tamsin, who is a chief habit scientist and fellow neuroscientist, helping professionals develop constructive habits. We will talk about one of the most difficult aspects of habit change, which is waiting too long. People are often well aware of a bad habit and even of the potential serious destructions it could cause, yet they keep engaging until major losses happen. This is often the progression of addictions, and many people experience it in professional life as well, keep doing unproductive things. It's often the reason why many businesses fail. Neuroscience has uncovered a great deal about habits, but it's still very hard to change self-defeating behavior at an early stage in real life. So, Tamsin, how do you think about this?
So it's a really interesting question. And it's something that I've really noticed in my coaching practice, that often people only come to me when the proverbial is hitting the fan and they're in a state of crisis, as you mentioned with addiction. I think there are two things that are really important, I think, to think about here. One is that I think a lot of people struggle to really think about creating the life that they really want, and they get stuck in a framework of operating where they're not really connecting their daily behavior to that big vision. And one framework that you can use for that is the ideal self, the ought self, the real self. And often we get stuck in this ought self, right, of showing up in a particular way. And you see that a lot in burnout. You see that a lot in, in addictive behavior, where we're stuck in kind of living into this idea of what we should be doing, and we should be should oriented, right? And that can be created by the training you have, the job you have, the gender, etc., right? All of these sorts of things that can create that framework. And so there's this sort of disconnect between what you're doing day to day, moment to moment, with what your life is going to look like in the future. And I think related to that is the ability to separate that kind of emotional dopamine, like if I do this thing now, I get this hit, versus can I pause and stop and look to the bigger why, the bigger life, the kind of ideal self, the ideal life that I'm really trying to create for myself.
I experienced this actually myself with my addiction other ways as well. So, for example, I'm quite happy that I did not wait too long. So my addiction was mostly a secret. Nobody knew about it, but it definitely affected many things in my life. And what you mentioned, that getting too engaged with that old self, that old image, is a bad habit on its own. Maybe that's where we need to start. I got that observation made by others about myself a few times, and I was completely blind to it. I heard it, but for some reason, I could not connect with it. So for me, it was a long, gradual process. Unfortunately, it took much longer than I wanted.
One practice is get it out of your head and onto paper, right? Because a lot of us think we know what we're doing, how we're spending our time, how much we're eating, how many hours we're spending here, there, and the other. Or we are in a state of kind of complete denial about it, right? And so one of the things that I often get my clients to do is to gather and track the data, qualitative and the quantitative. So I get my clients to track the quantitative data, as in, where are you actually spending your time? Where are you spending your money? What are you eating? And then the qualitative data, which is, how do you feel about that? And I think a lot of us are so indoctrinated and trained out of paying attention to the how do we feel. When we think about like being in school and you're told you're going to eat at 12 o'clock when the bell goes, right? We become like Pavlov's dogs, like ding, ding, the bell goes, it's time to eat our lunch, right? Rather than, am I actually hungry, right? The other piece is to really cultivate practices of journaling around pulling out into the world and making a little bit more objective what's going on. Because the practice of journaling is something that is helping you pull that internal swirl and look. And one of the things that I learned when I did a journaling training. So I got certified in like journaling practices to help people. And one of the tools that we were given, one of the tips, is that every time you finish journaling is to read back over what you've written immediately and write a summary statement. Because what that does is it gives you another extra level of information about, wow, I'm feeling a lot of shame. Wow, I'm feeling a lot of anger. I'm feeling a lot of confusion. I'm feeling a lot, and it can just give you that extra piece of information, which can then guide you into taking that next step of like, oh, I need to really have a conversation with this person. I need to really address my relationship with Instagram. I really need to, notice and do something about my relationship with alcohol, or whatever it is that you notice when you do that. And so often I think people are not really aware. And so creating practices that gives you the awareness, gives you the data, gives you something to look at that's not just stuck in here.
It's very useful if you can teach people how to do that properly, because it's kind of mysterious practice. It's even myself, when I first heard about it, I just completely refused doing it, because I just thought that journaling meant to do a sort of stream of consciousness, just write, and that I didn't find that helpful. But there are many different ways of doing it. You can do it in very structured way. I found a method that works for me that I wouldn't even call journaling, because it doesn't look like it. The key element is just the writing. I wanted to ask you something else. What do you think about using fear as a motivation, as a motivator to change habits? Because, we know from neuroscience that we are evolutionarily wired to respond to fear much more strongly than to positive things. So people suggest things like imagine the worst case scenario. But on the other side, if someone already has issues with self-esteem and they have problems in their life, and adding more fear to that may be counterproductive.
The way that I, coach around that, write around that, think about that, is that you have to know yourself. And so again, it's back to that piece of like really looking inside. I had a client who was struggling to create a habit. And so they created the carrot and stick, right? So they created the stick of, if they don't do this thing, they'd written a check for 4 figures that would go to an organization that they absolutely despise, right? So they gave this check to an organization. They said to their friend, if I don't do this thing over the next month, you get to cash that check to an organization that makes me so angry and so irritated and so beyond irate that I never want any of my money to go there, right? And one of my coaches talked about a guy who set up a whole load of automated tweets to go out, which said really embarrassing personal things about him as a way of getting him up out of bed, and on with his day, right? So we can do those sorts of things. I think that a big part of it is really knowing yourself, right? I have a friend who talks about, the way that she feels the support and the activation and the motivation to continue with a habit is a feeling of being loved, right? So for her, like when she's cultivating a habit like going to the gym, having somebody who comes to the gym with her and will like drive with her and like get coffee with her and like make her feel like she's being like hugged while she's doing it, rather than the negative consequence. So I think the big thing about this is knowing that there are a lot of strategies out there, but knowing yourself. And if the fear creates anger, resentment, lack of action, then don't do it. If that what works for you, do it.
For example, in addiction recovery, we create very elaborate, detailed recovery strategies. But one thing that we can never do is to give motivation to people. So do you have a strategy in your practice that can work very quickly? Let's say someone comes to you and in that state, they don't want to do any of those things.
So there are 2 things. One is reward. So rewards don't have to have anything to do with the habit you're trying to create, but they have to be something that you want. And so for most people, it's more of that, what I call like the toddler reward, right? The immediate, like you do the action, you get the reward. For some people, it's like, if I do this 20 times in 30 days, I get, a mani-pedi, a spa day, right? That's one piece. A second piece is, again, to really tie it to the big why. Why am I doing this? I want to do this because my dad had a heart attack at 50 and I don't want that life, right? I want to be there for my partner. I want to be there for my kids. I want to be that grandparent that rolls on the floor with my kids. I want to be that person who is hiking Machu Picchu when I'm 70, and not, in bed, on, anti-inflammatory medication and diabetes medication, etc., because I haven't taken care of myself in a way that I had the choice to or the opportunity to. Essentially laying the neural pathways, right? activating the reticular activating system. So you're like, I'm going to spot all of the coincidences out there that are going to align with this life that I am choosing to make, choosing to create by doing this thing, which on the surface might seem really tedious, really boring, really uninteresting.